3 Signs of Low Emotional Intelligence in Leadership on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu. Today we're talking about A.J.'s favorite topic, feelings.
If you've been around for a little while, you know that's a joke.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things actually is when we meet people in real life for the first time and they're podcast listeners. And they'll joke about this dynamic between the two of us. And you know what? To be fair, people like it. People, I think, either that or they're just being nice to our face. That there's a little bit of a yin and yang situation.
Yeah, it's one of our comedic elements, I think, that we have between us. Yeah,
that we're not the same. But today we're talking about emotional intelligence and why this is so important from a pastoral leadership perspective. And even if you're somebody who maybe just by personality doesn't maybe if you were to use the DISC, maybe you're high D, like on the dominant scale, or maybe high on the C scale, conscientiousness, you might then be lower on sort of some of those people skills. It's still important that you understand emotional intelligence. And I'm going to give you some credit here, AJ, actually, because you're someone who would probably say, yeah, I don't love to be diving into people's feelings. But we've known each other long enough and been in some tough situations together with churches or people. And I think you're proof positive that you can actually learn these skills, even if you don't have them innately.
True. I think we mentioned that later in the episode in one of our points. That I think EQ can be learned to a certain extent.
Right.
You're
not going to be easier, or harder for some people. Actually, I would even make the case, and not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think I would make the case that if you are a person who feels things more intensely, naturally, you have your own set of learning to do. You know what I mean? Like if you don't feel other people's emotions naturally, you're maybe just lower on empathy, then you have to learn how to try to do that. But if you're super empathetic, you need to learn to regulate so that you can lead in a tough situation and not just be like making it about you. So we're going to get into all that today. Yeah. But we're going to talk about 3 signs of low emotional intelligence in leadership. One request we would give at the top is please don't just be spamming other people in your church being like, this is our pastor. That's not helpful. Don't send that to us. We're not going to intervene on your behalf with your pastor. If you're like, hey, my pastor's got low EQ. Please don't. Let's
find a professional.
This is not our area of expertise. That's why we have aimed this at you. We want you to think about yourself. Where are there areas where you can grow? Please do not use this episode as a weapon against other people.
Couple quick resource mentions before we get started. I'm going to hold up for the people on YouTube this book, Developing Emotionally Mature Leaders by Dr. Aubrey Malphurs. This was one of the, was this Aub's last book?
It was.
Might have been his last book. And so that's a resource there written with a church perspective in mind. And Scott, tell them about the Healthy Churches Toolkit.
Man, the Healthy Churches Toolkit's an incredible place to get resourced, and it's a church leadership operating system, really. It's not just content, although there's great content in there. It's not just resources, though there are great resources in there. These are dynamic tools to help you lead and manage your church, from strategic planning tools and leadership development tools as well. So check that out for free for 7 days. Go to healthychurchestoolkit.com, sign up, and kick the tires.
There you go. The emotions you might feel there. Excitement, relief, joy.
All good ones. All positive emotions. All right. Let's get into it.
Let's go. Sign number 1. This is sign number 1 that, might be dealing with some low EQ there. You confuse anger with authority. You, if you have low EQ, might confuse anger with authority. lashing out, Scott, having really negative, maybe extreme emotions to situations or people. Yeah, sharp tones, frustration, low EQ people take, maybe difficult situations and express that back out with emotional, maybe over the top emotional responses, or very negative, maybe mostly negative responses to things that aren't perhaps in keeping. They're not in a reasonable alignment with what the situation would dictate by most people. And so this is an area that certainly a leader in a church would need to be very careful about and work towards correcting or, tempering this. If you're leading a team of people and you tend to overreact this way, get very harsh with your team, you may find, you kind of mentioned this, Scott, even before we started working, when we were talking about this point here, you might find perhaps that you can modify their behavior if that's what you're after. But that wouldn't be a healthy way of, improving a team dynamic.
Right.
Them becoming afraid to bring things to you or wanting to avoid you altogether. That's not raising a team dynamic to a productive, healthy level. That is basically crushing a team dynamic into compliance for your emotional state. And that's not where we want to be as leaders.
No, that's not real authority. I mean, I think a good analog to this is parenting. And it won't surprise anybody listening to this podcast that I feel like I should not claim some level of mastery over this that I don't have. I think one of the things that I've tried to work on my entire adult life, especially, is learning to control my temper, because I can get a little hot. But like with kids and parenting, it's not a real good exercise of authority to just yell at your children. Like, if I can get my kids to clean their room or do what I want them to do by yelling, well, I guess in the short term, I got what I wanted, which was for them to do something. But I've not built a relationship there. They don't respect me more. I don't have real authority. They've just learned that, okay, if I don't want dad to yell at me, I'll just do what he's saying. And that's not good. That's a substitute for genuine authority, where if they respect me, I don't need to yell. And I think that this happens a lot in churches where, and maybe anger, maybe lashing out isn't the weapon you use. Maybe the weapon that you use is passive aggressiveness. And people have just come to learn, okay, if I just don't do what pastor says, I'm going to get some backhanded, well, I guess, like some passive aggressive thing. Any sort of negative emotional tool that you use as a substitute for genuine authority is unhealthy. And I think that you should take stock, look at yourself and go, whether it's with your family, with your wife, with your kids, with your church, do people respond to what I'm saying because they respect what I'm saying and I have a positive relationship? Or do people respond to what I'm saying to avoid a negative interaction with me? Those are different things.
Yeah. This is actually an area, Scott, if I may open up for a moment.
Look
give
at
you
that.
a little glimpse.
Look at you.
A little glimpse. This would be an area that I actually I believe that that Christ made the Holy Spirit made a change in me. As a kid, I could fly off the handle really, really quickly. A lot of quick to anger for sure. And that's something that was quickly tempered in me. I think that was a really notable quick change that happened in me as I moved into adulthood and things. So I have to give the Holy Spirit some credit on this. Now don't cross me. Don't, and this is not gone. It's not.
The life we now live in the flesh, we live by faith in the Son of God.
I'm not saying it's gone to zero. I'm just saying I'm not quick to anger like I once was.
Yeah, I would say the Holy Spirit has had his hands full with me. I really do think that my temper is not what it was 10 years ago. but it's not what it needs to be. It's not who I want to be. So that's going to go to our final point later. But I mean, like these things are not set in stone. You can change, and it starts with self-awareness. So knowing, hey, I tend to react angrily in these situations is an important place to start. And hopefully you're surrounded by people who will give you a little bit of grace, especially if you can apologize and say, hey, I recognize this is how I've been acting, and I want you to speak into my life when you find me doing that. I want you to call me out and say, hey, you're reacting to this negatively, instead of having a productive conversation.
Yeah.
So these things can change. They can get better.
Yeah. All right. Our second sign that you may be operating in a low EQ state, you struggle to read the room. Not really maybe appropriately using maybe right reactions, words to what's going on around you, in a close environment. So this is a great skill for leaders to develop. To be able to see what's going on in a room, facial expressions, but the finer points of this. I mean, words are one thing. We can hear what people are saying, and we can know. I mean, it's obviously the probably the easiest way to see what's going on. But yeah, facial expressions and the way people carry themselves, emotions, how they hold their head, what they're doing with their hands. I mean, all of these things. The more you're around people in our line of ministry, in leading teams, being in front of teams of people. It's a tremendous asset to be able to see what's going on with folks in the unspoken space. In our environment, we're trying to get the best out of people. We're trying to get ideas and conversations. But in your environment, leading a staff team or leading a church, this could be a one-on-one thing, or couples counseling and seeing the dynamics between people, or leading your team. Yeah, really being able to see where people are at emotionally is a tremendous asset to develop as a leader, to be able to respond appropriately, to get the best out of people, to encourage people, and to be able to move people past conflict or other things that might be barriers. So yeah, it's a big one. Reading the room it's a great skill to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And this can be hard. I mean, I think especially if this doesn't come naturally to you. But you can learn how to read the room better. And some signs that maybe you're not is when people stop bringing problems to you because they just know you're not going to be able to help, or volunteers quietly disengage, or staff meetings start to feel kind of transactional, where we're just kind of, okay, let's just hit this, and you're just not able to see what people are feeling. It's just a red flag. It's a bad sign. If you're leaving every meeting going, oh gosh, I thought that went great, and you couldn't sense that there were varying levels of resonance in the room, like that's a sign that you're maybe not catching it. You're not picking up what's going down.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned this, AJ, but reading facial expressions and eyes, I think one of the things that I have to sometimes train myself to do is, especially when I'm presenting, I tend to go into presentation mode, and by default, I kind of just start looking overheads, like because I'm presenting to the whole room, but trying to be thoughtful about looking at eyes and see where are people at, because you're right. If you have any degree of emotional intelligence, generally, if you're looking at people's faces, you can kind of see where the room is at. But if you don't even see yourself looking for that, it's a bad sign. Like if you're like, I'm not even thinking about what's going on in the room. It's just not good. And a leader's emotions are contagious, for better or for worse. And so whatever you're putting out, people are going to be picking up, and that's going to affect the whole room. So if you're struggling to read the room, there's an empathy deficit there you got to work on.
Yeah. All right. Our third sign of a low EQ leader, or an area that you may be low EQ in, is that you react instead of respond. And you might think, well, what's the difference between those? Well, it's really kind of, I guess maybe we a lot of times would say a gut reaction. I mean, this is something that our brain isn't in real time processing. It's just something that immediately happens. And the higher EQ person in I would say a very short period of time is able to think, process, make a decision about how to respond and not react without thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't something that you sit there contemplating for minutes. This is something that with skill happens almost as fast as a reaction, but you're in control enough of your emotions and your brain processing that you can take in whatever that input was and formulate an intentional response,
Right.
instead of something that just comes out of you emotionally driven.
Yes, this is emotional regulation. You can say something hard or harsh to me or critical of me. I can let that my initial reaction might be anger or frustration or resentment or whatever, and I can let those negative emotions that everybody feels to some degree wash over me, and then I can get past that to hear what you're saying, try to see what it is that you're feeling. Why are you saying this? And it could be that you're experiencing a negative emotion, or maybe you're just being honest and saying something I need to hear or whatever. I can internalize that and then regulate myself to give back the right emotion. I think a really good example of this biblically is we often think anger is not always bad, by the way. Like anger can be the proper response when directed. Godly anger. So you think about Jesus driving out the money changers, for example. One of the interesting pieces of that story is that Jesus he's not flying off the handle. He does not walk into the temple, notice for the first time that something is happening, and then just start flipping tables. A really key element of this story is that he fashions a whip out of reeds. That takes time to do. One does not simply just grab some reeds and make a whip real quick. Jesus took time. I don't know that he's the Lord. I get it. But you have to understand that he's also in human flesh. He's feeling the same kinds of feelings that we feel. And he's processing this and developing the proper response. So when Jesus drives out the money changers, he is not driving them out in an unthoughtful, careless, off-the-handle kind of way. This was an intentional act, and it was the right response for the moment. And so it can be okay. There can be times where we need to do something disruptive, or angry or whatever, but these should never be knee-jerk reactions. They ought to be thoughtful responses to what is appropriate for the situation that we're in. And sometimes we're just too quick to those negative emotions.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite Jesuses, the whip making Jesus. The whip making and sword buying.
I think a lot of people think that Jesus, I'm just walking into the temple and, I'm angry. Like, that's not how that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, actually, it's an interesting point that you even brought up. I mean, yeah, I never even thought about, the time it takes to make a whip, but obviously he had been in the temple a million times,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, he decided this is the day. This is the day we're going to make a change.
But even that it's not like he just saw it and was reminded and like, that's it, I can't take it anymore. Like, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
Ooh. It was still thoughtful.
You ever see me in a corner weaving myself a whip? Might want to steer clear.
I'll be like, hey, back up there, Indiana Jones. Let's
Why is our consultant sitting over there making a whip?
Okay, let me start landing this airplane. Just know that you can, we've talked about some of this already, you can actually grow your EQ. Your EQ is not fixed. Your emotional intelligence is not fixed. It's a set of skills that can be developed. And Aubrey provides a framework in the book that AJ showed you at the beginning of this sequence of steps. It starts with self-awareness. So am I aware of the things that I'm feeling? The next step would be self-control. This is where I can actually manage my emotions. So when I feel something, I don't have to react immediately. I can own that emotion and own that feeling and then choose a response. The third step is then empathy. So can I feel what someone else is feeling and internalize that? And then finally, relationship management. So I can actually leverage emotions to manage my relationships so that I'm not only regulating myself, but I can actually internalize what's happening with someone, feel what they're feeling, and then develop the appropriate response to help them feel what they need to feel in that moment. So those are levels of emotional maturity, and I am not going to claim at all that I'm an expert at this, because if my wife listens to this episode, she'll go, "Great, yeah. How's that emotional intelligence working for you?" But I do want to keep working on this, and I do think I'm further along today than I was 10 years ago, and I hope that 10 years from now I'm a more emotionally intelligent person than I am today.
Yeah. We've talked about this many times regarding me. So, and my wife is a podcast listener. She'll say, "I see you are practicing your acting skills again this week."
Yes, it just needs to be said. No one on this podcast is claiming to be the expert at this.
But yes, you know what? I think you're absolutely right, though. Yeah, you can improve in this stuff. You're never going to turn a robot into an empath, into a poet. But although AI is making a good case for that, but with real humans, probably not. But yeah, I think there is some improvement to be found, and for the people around you would appreciate that. Likely,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, and tell all your friends about this podcast, the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're glad to have you with us, and we'll see you next week.